You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, the podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their experiences recently at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we talk about rules and rulings. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me as always is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. What do you think about that?
What about rudabagels and ruffles and their ridges?
I'm trying some new stuff here in the intro.
Oh, okay, sure. I'm here for it. Why not?
Yeah. I feel like you were a little hesitant there.
I was, because I wasn't sure if I was getting a layup leading question or, I wasn't sure what to do there. So
Would you say you were unsure because you didn't kind of know what to expect? The expectations were potentially not clear?
Yeah.
That was a little bit of foreshadowing. Anyways, all right, we're gonna
I don't know. It was vague. It was almost like some shadow darkness clouded my mind.
No, absolutely not. Cut that. Okay, today's episode focuses on the difference between and adjudication of rules and rulings. Something no one has any opinions on at all. So, Jody, why don't you take us to the table to kick this off?
Happy to. My campaign in, generally speaking, Saltmarsh has taken a bit of a turn down into the Forge of Fury module. So my adventurers have returned to town, and they are making their second descent into the caves that lie between the Dwarven Mine entrance and the titular Forge of Fury. They hear the sound as they enter of two of the cave's factions in battle in a side chamber. Their elven ranger, Silas, scouts ahead into the shadows to get a sense of things. As the battle in that next room dies down, with the sound of orcish voices retreating back to the upper halls, it's clear that one of the factions has driven off the other. Seizing the moment, the party elects to try and take the attack to the remaining faction in hopes of clearing the caves of one of its monstrous denizens. As their stinking amphibious foes descended on them and emerged from the shadows, the party's dwarven wizard Borin casts web into the shadow-filled cave mouth ahead in order to stymie the advance of these reptilian assailants. Hopefully, this would make them easy pickings. Alas, the casting went slightly askew, and while the web was successfully conjured from the aether, the wizard's aim was slightly amiss, and the spell landed in an unintended location, isolating the ranger from the rest of the party. So, the question is, how does casting into an area you can't see work? How does the party recover Silas now that he's on the other side of a web without a clear escape path? What did we come up with? Well, we had to make a few rulings right there at the table about the nature of web. And as part of that conversation also about casting into darkness, we made some determinations that we've decided are going to persist into the future.
All right, Jody, let us gather around the fire, and all things Shadowdark always seem to come back to, at least for us, web.
Yeah, there it is. That lovely, lovely spell. It's a good one.
It's such a great, well, I think it's a great way to start. So you gave us a nice setup there and kind of teed me up quite nicely for rulings and rules and house rules and stuff like that. So let us start with web. And let's use it as an example for kind of what we're talking about today. Why did you choose this instance, or why did this use of web make you want to discuss this particular topic? And also, what do you mean that they attempted to cast the spell, but it didn't? This is a binary. You either cast the spell or you don't, Jody. What's going on here?
There it is. There's the rub. So it was just the nature of the discussion we had above table took moments, seconds to make a couple callings, left it up to my player to say, hey, how does this work? They said, yep, that sounds good. And I've made this ruling a few times. Another spell that could be proxied in here instead of web is actually Burning Hands, funny enough. Burning Hands, as described, should hit, I believe, all of the squares adjacent, if you're using squares, adjacent to the casting wizard. So it would make a full circle around them. They make a circle of flame around them, which is rad and very cool, and also very hard to use safely without torching, allies, because it doesn't do that. So the question my players have that often comes up, that I feel is a totally reasonable question and came up in the case of web, is, well, can I know there is a space ahead of me. I can't see a specific location because of the end of our torchlight, but I know I'm at the end of a cave. I just want to go explode this web into the end of the cave mouth. I know the cave's only about 10, 15 feet wide. I have a sense of roughly where the cave ends. I'm just going to blow it up right there. Okay. But you can't see where you're casting it, and you don't actually know whether there's a wall there or there's not a wall there, or you are just, per the classic Dr. Demento meme, casting it into the darkness. Literally was the spell. So I'm like, there's some variables here that need to be considered beyond just, you and I have talked a bunch about really having increasingly a little bit of frustration or disconnect, I think is a better term, with precision casting. Yeah. That the spell placements of my fireball is going to land exactly at this point on the ground, and it's going to exactly explode this big. You have adopted the what I like to think of as the air octopus, which is the loosely swirling wrist gesture. Yeah. Like you're stirring a bowl of something.
I'm put that in as a house rule.
That's right. The hand octopus. That's all it says.
Hand octopus.
Spells work on the hand octopus.
Spells work on hand octopus ruling only.
So what came up was, and I've done this a handful of times, and I think it's how I want to handle all of these spell instances going forward. I'm going to go back to Burning Hands, and then we can come back to web, because web's a little more of a sticky situation, you might say.
Shut up.
Okay. So if Burning Hands, say I have 3 goblins lined up in front of me, and then I have somebody behind me, and I'm the wizard, and one of my allies is immediately off my shoulder. I don't want to cast Burning Hands because I don't want to torch my friend. I also don't want to lose my turn, and we are going in initiative order around the table, and their turn is after mine, so I can't. Well, why can't I just begin my spell and end it prematurely? Why can't I just hit the 3 goblins and stop it? It's a reasonable question. Isn't that the exact sort of off the character sheet and creative thinking we want our players to engage with and say, hey, can I try this thing that sounds reasonable? I started the spell. Can't I not do a 360 spin? That seems like the sort of thing you ought to be able to control with your character. So my decision is, you need to make a second casting attempt. You cast the spell and it goes off, or it doesn't. That remains rules as written. There's not really any debate or lack of clarity there. The second step in it is, so you want to alter the casting of the spell. Okay, well, if you are successful on that second attempt, you can do what you wanted to do. It's exactly the same as casting the spell twice in one turn, which sounds weird. The second roll is just, if it's a tier 1, then you need to hit an 11. Cool, easy. If you do that, you can shape the spell, for lack of a better term, to a degree that seems reasonable. Okay, cool. What if you fail? Well, then I get to randomize by some mechanism of my own, and I'm happy to explain what that is, given the situation. I'm going to randomize what happens. So going back to the web, in the Burning Hands example, I'm going to just hit these 3 and then I'm going to stop. Okay, well, I'm actually going to roll a D8 for the 8 squares, if you will, adjacent to you. And starting with the first goblin, that's how many you're going to ignite. And it might be 1 and you only torch 1 goblin, or it might be 8 and you torch the whole lineup. You tried to shape the spell in a way that is not its intended purpose. It did not behave as expected, and you're trying to mess around, so you got to make a roll. So, does this add a roll? Yes, I found it adds a beat of action that is not in the scope of Shadow Dark unpleasant, because things move so quickly. In the case of web, I want to throw this spell in this instance out into the darkness of a cave and have it detonate at I have a rough understanding of that point, but not exactly. They were being very careful about how much light they pushed into this cavern.
Sure.
So they only had a vague sense. And when I say their ranger Silas was at the edge of the torchlight, he was literally at the very end of visibility, doing the scout and listen, what do your elf ears hear sort of thing. So I said, this is an instance of that. So I'm going to say, this is where you would like it to be. We did have a drawn map quickly representing this scenario. And I said,
miniatures?
Yep, there were miniatures indeed on said map. And the player said, I'd like it to go here. I go, cool. If you fail in your casting, I'm going to give you a second attempt to control it, because you were trying to literally lob something in the dark and have it detonated at an invisible point. That is not generally how these things work. Like, it's given normal parameters. I can see it. I can know it. I can cast it. Okay. So if it doesn't, then I'm going to use just, again, a D8 works really well. You can just roll the D8 and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the direction it's going. And it's going D6 times 10 feet. Mm-hmm. Cool. So D6, D8, boop, wargaming me finds deviating things very easy. So it actually just slid over to the wall and it was a few feet off, but it did land in such a way that it cut them off from the next chamber where Silas was. The next part of rules versus rulings is we stopped and I said, hey guys, how do we want to rule web? Because the wizards now found a scroll to learn web and got it early, which was cool. It's actually ahead of their learning curve that they're throwing web around. So Rat found a scroll, did the whole thing. That's awesome. I want him to use it. Is it treated as though it were an actual natural occurring web, albeit a massive and very sticky one, depending on the threshold of the spell to bypass it? Or is it purely magical and it will last through its duration, and the only way to interact with it is to make the opposed check against it and move through it? Or like a real web, if you put any sort of flame at all near it, it's just going to burn back. No problem. Like, you just burn it away and it pulls back and you can just blow through the thing really easily. It's your spell, wizard, but from here on out, whatever we determine, that's how it works. So we made a permanent ruling, and the casters, the player said, I've always thought of it as like more of you're creating a natural webbing and it should be burnable. Great. So later in that same combat, they chucked a burning oil flask into it and burned away a huge chunk to open up a passageway to get their guy back. And very cool stuff ensued because we went, no, that web once exploded becomes interactable. Mm-hmm. It's just now it's a terrain feature that's interactable on a set timeline. Sure. Cool. That's really neat stuff. Later combat, there were 2 waves of these combatants chasing after them. They kept really poking at this. We want to fight like 20 of these things in the dark, until they eventually went like, oh, there's like 20 of them. We should probably get out of here. And the question came up of, can I lob the spell? Think of it as almost like there's 2 ranks pushing in. There's a first wave, and then the leader is in a second group behind them. Can I lob the spell over their head to get the leader guy in the back instead of, because they're far enough apart that the web won't hit everybody? And I said, sure, but you're like trying to skirt it under a cave mouth and like arc the thing. That's not really how usually spells work. Same deal. You can try casting it twice, but if it goes wrong, anywhere from you guys in the cave itself all the way out to where you want it to be, that's where it's going to land. And he was like, no, the stakes are too high here, because if it lands and sticks us in, we get tangled in it, that we'd be in bad shape. So that's that ramble. That whole thing was, we now have agreed at my table that if you want to shape a spell, and I'm the arbiter, right? But if you want to shape a spell, you can try that, and we're going to throw an extra die at it. But this is the ruling from here on out. Okay. Is it in the rules? No, but we have made a ruling, and this is the rule going forward, because there are no rules around this kind of stuff. But again, it's exactly the kind of stuff you want people to try. So I would like that folks to go, well, if I cast a web, and then also the creatures lit up a torch and started burning the web away at one point, because they were like, we have compatriots stuck and we want to go get these people. And so they started burning the web away themselves, because it's a giant web. And well, they also had a magic user of their own with them. So all of these things then played into a level of predictability.
Yeah. So there's a lot to disentangle there. And what I want to start with is specifically, whenever rulings and overrules, or whatever the kind of OSR principle gets talked about, inevitably, there's some like kind of stickiness in terms of the definition. So let's kind of define our terms as we see them. So the way I'm hearing this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that because to me what you've just described is a house rule. So a ruling is a spur-of-the-moment decision that the GM makes to adjudicate a particular decision. These happen all the time. Stat checks are probably the most consistent rulings around, because we as GMs are deciding what stat makes sense in a particular place and situation. Sometimes the module calls it out, but often they don't. And so stat checks are one of those places where rulings and setting DCs is another one, happen regularly. But what you're talking about is something different as far as I'm concerned. And this is a little bit of semantics and splitting hairs, but I think it's important because your ruling essentially translated into a persistent ruling, which I would say ends up being a house rule in many ways. And what I want to know is a couple of things. First of all, do you agree with that kind of framework? And second of all, are you going to write these down? Like, how set in stone are they? And the thing that people end up, folks who like more rules heavy games, what they end up, their pushback on rulings over rules is, how will I know how things work? And so I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I just want to make sure we have our definitions. And then if you want to, I don't know if you have like another example of kind of persistent rulings or that you can use to kind of show these definitions and kind of answer my like 59 questions I just lobbed at you.
The answer is yes. That's all it is.
42.
42. I think your definitions work just fine for me in terms of rule. Hopefully there's no ambiguity around rule. That's the stuff that's in the book.
You'd be surprised.
I would not.
I mean, I guess interpretations of rules, but yeah, a rule is something that's written in the rule book.
And if you are a group or players who see the rules and are able to extrapolate those out to therefore the following is true and we don't need to do any of this stuff, great. I'm going
to stop you there, because therefore the following is true is a ruling. Anyways, I don't want to get too bogged down in like the swampy nonsense that is like the semantics of this. But
I think it's important, and I do want it to highlight something though.
Right. I think that there is some intellectual dishonesty here that happens that I find fascinating. It's low stakes, not that big of a deal. But I find that sometimes people want to weasel out of saying that they make rulings and they're just playing rules as written in a way that I think is a little no. So extrapolating things from the rules is a ruling, even if you think that it makes sense. Okay,
right.
Go ahead.
No, I infamously caused a kerfuffle in our own little Discord corner about saying that all GMs put their thumb on the scale. And
you didn't cause a kerfuffle. You just phrased it in a way that was loaded.
Inflammatory. I did indeed. And I stand by that in light of this conversation.
All right, go ahead.
So the rules and rulings portion is, I have made this ruling multiple times that if a player is trying to do something that is pushing the boundaries of is that possible? I don't know, man. Yes, there is an inclination at many tables and is called out in the rule book many times about, say yes. Nobody wants to miss putting the killing shot, bow shot through the missing scale in the dragon's hide because they were 5 feet short, I think is more or less a specific example from the rule book. And I have made this ruling in the moment multiple times. And at the end of this encounter said, you know what, you guys, from here on out, I like how this is working with our group. If you want to do that, we can do that. Where you are shaping your spell.
Sure.
Now, if somebody said, I want to throw a fireball into the middle of a melee that includes 2 of my party companions and have it not catch them, no, that's not how fireball works. Like, that's the sort of thing that...
I was already thinking of ways to really really break the
Well,
system.
and
Jody.
there's the essential piece is at our table, nobody in our play group is going to balk if I say, that's not really in the spirit of that spell. That's asking for too much. What about this? This could be viable. Do you want to do that? No. Okay. Well, then come up with something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a natural play flow at my table that I feel very comfortable with my players. Have I played with groups that I wouldn't go anywhere near this? Absolutely, because they would be immediately looking for ways to exploit it. And if in my description, again, with Burning Hands of, oh, well, I wouldn't do that because my players would, then don't do it. But I'm pointing that out for the sake of then your rulings need to be different because your players are different.
Yeah, sure.
And what becomes a house rule to me is over time, I have made this ruling enough times that let's just make it predictable. Would I write it down in a future campaign zine house ruly book? I don't know. I don't think I would, because for me, what this is not so much a house rule is a consistent ruling. And a house rule is, to me, I am amending or adding on to the rules as written core book.
Yeah.
A ruling is I can change this whenever I want. I as GM have the power to change this whenever I want. I am the final arbiter on it. Mm-hmm. And in this instance, I'm saying, hey, here is a reasonable boundary or a very interesting spot to push on things.
Yeah.
That you're wanting to do something different. You know, I have a spell cast with a duration. Can I end that spell? That's a great question. It's not a focus spell, but can I prematurely end the duration? I think that's the kind of question that any GM should be ready to answer.
Yeah. So you've now added a category, Jody. So you have house rules, which amend or add to the core rules. You have whatever the hell this thing is, which is not written down, which is a consistent ruling, which technically amends or adds to the core rules, but I'll let you have it. And then you have rulings, which can change. So I think the place where this ends up, especially getting complicated, there are two places. And the first, I don't know if I want to spend that much time on. You can, I will allow you to kind of to answer this question. Is like, at what point does a game that is about rulings over rules become somewhat impossible to talk about? Because, and I don't mean like that we can't talk about Shadow. Like we have an entire show that's, but like to a certain extent, we when we're doing this show, we have to couch a lot of what we say in, but we do this differently, and like that's just like the nature of these kinds of systems. That when you're talking to somebody online about Shadowdark in particular, oftentimes if you're disagreeing about something, if you just take a step back and you kind of ask them a bit more generalized question, you start to realize like, oh, we have interpreted this particular rule or this particular situation, we've made a ruling about it with specifically different outcomes in mind, like different play styles or different, some people want a more simulationist style, some people want more abstracted, whatever it is, there's some sort of philosophical or some play style difference in terms of where the ruling is coming from. And so that's challenging, because when we start talking about spell shaping or whatever you want to call it, what I immediately think about is, okay, so does this work the same way for a combat maneuver? Because inevitably, and I don't know if this is the second thing, is like, I don't know if you want to get into the kind of the nitty gritty about why you think this works, or like, why you don't want to write it down. Is it because you're worried that you might have to change it, and why that is? But for me, when I write something down as a house rule, the thing that matters to me is that that ink on the page solidifies it as a truth and an expectation for players that they can reference as if it's the rule book, right? Mm-hmm. They can point to it. What you're talking about is somewhere in between a ruling and a house rule. They can't point to it necessarily. It's not a physical it's not physically on a page, but it is something you guys have agreed to. How malleable, though, do you think that is? And does that malleability of rulings, does that lead to, and it does, but I guess maybe let me rephrase this, how big of a deal is that in terms of a shared Shrouded Ark experience? That's a broader question. So let's tackle the first one. Like, how malleable is this rule?
Well, I mean, there's the rub. It's ultimately my decision. How malleable is it? Well, quite a while back, we did an episode about let's make a deal, or like bargaining at the table.
Yeah.
To me, what I'm doing is saying, hey, we don't have to start every bargaining session at 0.
Oh, that's interesting.
There is a known commodity when bargaining. And how malleable is it? Well, we're gonna bounce it back and forth, and ultimately, as the GM, I have to make the call. I have to make the ruling. That is our agreed social contract at sitting down to play the game. Is that the judge, the GM, will make rulings to promote the game moving forward in an enjoyable way for everybody, themselves included. And this just says let's jump ahead in this one particular zone. We have something predictable. Your other question that was tied in there around melee combat. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is room for this sort of discussion. The codification of spells creates more rules. There are, I believe, roughly 30 pages of the rule book dedicated to spells and the casting thereof. So in that volume, as opposed to a few paragraphs around swinging a sword, there is a lot more room for discussion, interpretation, and things to figure out. There are many ranges to discuss. There are, and this gets back to, on some level, I don't see this terribly different than what does a critical or a fumble mean at everybody's table, how they're going to interpret fails maximally on a fumble, a natural one, is going to look different. Well, do you have a standardized ruling about what that looks like? Do you want to turn it into a house rule that is, it always works like this? Or is it, it's kind of situational? It depends. Yeah. And I think that's really important to this whole discussion, is that notion of, when we're talking about rulings, and this kind of goes back to something you were saying a minute ago, when we're talking about rulings, that every GM is going to make rulings, and that they have to. And I think what inspired me in this scene and through the Discord conversation was going, I've made this ruling a bunch of times. We are moving down a different path once I've made the same ruling a bunch of times.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. I don't want to make this into like our house rules episode part 2, but I am interested in the combat maneuvers versus spells, because this comes up all the time. And I don't like codified mechanics for combat maneuvers, insofar as the first one always ends up being cleave. But I do think I have been convinced, due to the volume of people asking about combat maneuvers, I am convinced that there's space for them, or there is a want that enough people have that it would satisfy folks to have them. But in the absence of official Arcane Library published combat maneuvers, quote unquote official, or whatever, blah blah blah, rulings over rules, et cetera, provisios, whatnot. But all that aside, I think, for me, the fact that the spells have more ink spilled means that there is way less that I'm willing to move less in terms of rulings. Like I am of the camp that says, no, the spell lasts for the amount of duration. You cannot, if it lasts for 5 rounds, it lasts for 5 rounds. If it is a focus spell, I'll give you a little, you can end it prior to making a focus check. That's a ruling. That's a consistent ruling that I have made. But and this is one of those I think every GM is going to have to make their own decision, obviously. But for me, there is a relationship between the amount of words and the amount of rules, and how willing I am to make a ruling that substantively changes the game. Like, I am not interested in spell shaping at my table specifically because the spells have so many words attached to them that's what they do, right? And is it reasonable for players to want to shape spells? Totally. That's not what they do. And I am more in the camp of making rulings about rules that are literally non-existent. So I don't know, what is your reaction to that? Because this is a place where I think we disagree.
I agree with you on the round versus focus.
I will find a point of agreement for. Yeah. Obviously, you disagree about the spells and rulings and spell shaping. You're doing it at your table,
obviously. And well, I just want to be clear: the rounds and focus, I judge it the same way you do. If there is a fixed number of rounds, the thing is in effect for that number of rounds. Not doing that has massive consequences in the game, and it is codified with a very small extrapolation that's how these things work.
Sure.
That, can you stop focusing on a spell? It doesn't specifically say you can. It also doesn't specifically say you can't. So there we go. The other factor is in terms of there's a lot of words here there's a lot of words there. And I think I agree with that's a good gate in terms of how is this useful for anybody listening to us yammer is
sure.
How much ink is there already? And do you understand how those systems interlock? This is something new I'm doing because I have spent a lot of time playing with web and other spells.
Yeah.
And fireball and lightning bolt and burning hands that I go, no, I have an understanding of how this whole system fits together, how these cogs and gears are working together, that I feel comfortable making those calls. I would push back, and here's our disagreement point, is, but you are making those rulings already around spells due to the air octopus.
Spaghetti monster.
Yeah, the spaghetti monster, the air octopus, the spells generally here.
Yeah.
Is at some level you're making a ruling, and in the instance I gave that kind of prompted this whole thing was I want to shoot the fireball into a room that is dark.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to hit, but I'd like it to explode roughly this far away from me.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing about that spell that says that's not how that spell works. It must impact something. Is that the intention with the spell? Is that so? My point being is, and this is kind of that where we always push back on, people that are like, I only play rules as written, exactly as written. And we go, no, you don't, because there's a bunch of spots in the rule book that are not written that you have to make a call.
It's a requirement.
It is
table stakes.
Right. That the rulings versus rules is part. It's one of the core conceits of the game that you're going to be required to use your judgment. So how do you make a call here? And it's funny in this because I think at table, the impression or the feeling is often that of the two of us, you are more of a yes and
totally.
GM, and I am more of a like, no, it's rigid and no, but no, but you could do this instead. And it's interesting to be on the other side of it and being like, no, but let's do this thing. It's fun. It's neat, and say yes. And I've always
thought that was a strange dichotomy that I didn't necessarily agree with. But yes, I will agree with the kind of perspective. Here and on that note, that makes me think about maybe a different way to kind of like define this dichotomy of in terms of how we think about rulings and using spells and combat maneuvers as kind of a point of argument or what have you. In this case, I like to have flexibility in my rulings for player characters and classes that are quite simply less defined. Like, to me, when we flex our ruling muscles, what we're doing is we are rewarding player creativity almost always, right? And when you sign up to play a fighter, you sign up to play a class that is functionally less interesting than, in terms of the amount of buttons you can push. You just have less you can do written down. And so for me, that necessitates more flexibility in rulings. Not necessarily, and again, you are free to disagree with me, but I'm trying to reframe my point maybe a little bit. That if you're playing a thief, you actually have more than a fighter, but you don't have spells, you don't have and so to me, there's kind of a variance in terms of my latitude on rulings and my willingness to allow players to bend the rules and be creative, and specifically to leverage their class features in this case. We talked about backgrounds recently. Love when any player character and any class uses their background and leverages their background or parts of their character, their god, whatever. In this instance, this dichotomy comes down, I think, to me being hesitant to lean into rulings when we're talking about a system in the game that is already offering players so much option, right? They have so many options. So I guess that I don't want to belabor this point, but I'll kick it back to you so that you can have the last word here, because I have made my points so articulately. Maybe, I don't know.
Clearly, absolutely.
It's very clear, Jody.
I'm going to give you 2 questions.
No, I don't want any questions.
Okay, you're not taking questions. Noted.
Yes. Sorry. That's the end of the show. Here we go.
Give the man the buttons and he rains his power with just
all right,
absolute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to take it back to just the nature of web. And
everything comes back to web.
Everything comes back to web. Is it as we understand it in our day-to-day existence lives, a huge spider web, or is it some sort of magical substance that can only be interacted with by bypassing the spell casting check as described in the rules?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have ruled it like it is an arcane web. That is how I have ruled it. I have not had a need to define it in the way that you did. I think it's very interesting. I think it's a cool question. I like the fact that you defined it as a physical thing. I think I could be convinced either way.
So
I just walked right into you. I've activated your trap card.
You walked into my web. So let's just say
I hate this.
Cast web in such a way that the edge of the web has left a potential combatant enemy at the very edge of it, ensconced, entangled, bewebbed. Bewebbed. Now they run up and whack it with their sword.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit because that thing is now tangled up in the web to whacking the thing with the sword? Or is there a risk of the sword hitting the web?
Okay, so these to me do not seem like spell shaping questions, though, which are specifically designed to make spells more high utility. These seem to me like maybe they are kind of in-world truths that need to be defined based on a particular scenario.
Right. Now,
which I guess is I don't know. Maybe I'm splitting hairs just to defend my position here. I don't know. But that's kind of, I don't know. What was your second question? Because I think for me that is not necessarily germane to kind of the point that I was making. I can see what you're getting at, but what was the second question?
Well, it was the second thing was if I want to hack through the web with my sword.
Oh, okay.
Is there a mechanical something that has to be worked out there? The other one that you and I have actually interacted with on, I think, to my mind now, comedically multiple times, hold portal.
Yeah.
Does there need to be a physical portal to be held, or does it create a magical barrier, which is actually comedically very similar to web in how it works? They both have this, the casting threshold is the threshold by which you bypass my point, my rambling kind of leading point is that as GMs, we have to have some sort of heuristic by which we are making these calls. And you do, you absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying I have another one, and I don't know that beyond burning hands, there's a whole lot I would do to like shape spells of like, you want to stop doing a 360 early. A lightning bolt goes the distance it goes. A fireball explodes the way it explodes. I want to cast the fireball up into the corner of the room to precisely make sure it only covers half the room and only catches these. Hey, if it seems like there's a reasonable chance you could do that here, sure, let's throw another die at it, because there are natural questions that players are going to ask and say, hey, I want to do this thing. My favorite argument, and it is one of from, I think, the day I walked into the world of the Shadow Dark community, this thing comes up over and over and over.
Yep, let's do it.
I have a sword in my hand.
Okay. I'm gonna imagine this.
Okay.
I'm gonna use my imagination.
Your right hand has a sword.
Boom.
Short sword? Your left hand,
sweet
you
short sword.
reach out.
It's got a gem in the hilt.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's awesome.
It is, dude. It's glistening.
Maybe it's a master crafted sword.
I think it is.
+1 to hit.
Sponsored.
Okay.
With your left hand, there is a very stylish and sharp butter knife.
Sorry, I can't.
Yeah. Dual wielding.
Sorry,
dual
I
wielding.
can't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This doesn't make any sense. I have a weapon in one hand, and you want me to do what with the other one?
I'd like you to pick up that small hatchet to your left.
I'm sorry, you lost me.
Yeah, this doesn't make sense. I cannot do this. In terms of combat maneuvers, this is the I am very fortunate that I have two hands, and I can have a beverage in each of them.
Yes.
I can and did have a beverage in each hand, and it was delightful. Why? It's so unsatisfying to tell a player, so I can pick up a shield. Yes, but I may not pick up that hand axe. No, you may not.
Well, you can, but if
what does
you
it
have
do?
to, you have to tie. You have to use your rope to tie it to yourself.
Right.
You can't use it.
So I think in all of this bigger discussion of rulings and rules, and and I think I was careful. It's not rulings versus rules. It's rulings and rules.
Yes,
both are going to happen, and they're maybe for a GM they are in opposition, but for me, I'm like, there needs to be ands. Funny enough, I have yet to ever have to make a dual wielding call.
I know, it's so weird. It comes up all the time, and it comes up almost not at all in our games.
My sadness is, does it never come up in the game because everybody knows there's no rule for it?
No,
and
I put it in as a house rule. I
literally don't remember which one you went with.
I went with the one that's totally broken, which is you roll both dice and take the higher of the two. You have to be a martial class, and you have to be like you can hold a finesse weapon, or I think at one point it was just like you can hold two one-handed weapons, which means if you hold 2d6 damage short swords, you are rolling 2d6 and taking the higher of the two. You do 6 damage more time, like a sizable chunk of a percent chance to do 6 damage. I mean, it's like a no-brainer. We've got knuckleheads just cruising around like, no, just
being one of those knuckleheads. Case in point, I didn't even know that was one of your house rules. That's on me. I should learn to read.
Look, here's the thing. I say knuckleheads because we play with people who have a tendency to not leverage our rulings and not leverage just the core rules in a way that gives us the latitude to be able to do things like spell shaping. Right, which for other groups would not work because of the way that they play, which is fine, and they need, like you said, other rulings. What I think about dual wielding. By the way, my current version of dual wielding is just give a +1 to hit, like boom, done. It's all good. I also masterwork weapons +1 to hit. Awesome idea. You brought it to me. Excellent. Love it. Full stop.
You won't hear me say this often. Thank you, Games Workshop.
Incredible. But here's the thing that I think And also agree to disagree on our kind of divergent points. I think it's
100%.
Yeah, it's an interesting disagreement, but I don't want to belabor the point. Here's what I want to ask you though: is when players arrive at your table, inevitably over the course of a campaign, we make a lot of rulings. Some of those become consistent rulings. Some of those become house rules. Inevitably, players need to some degree, know the rules. This is a long-standing debate that I think, fortunately, we are no longer having anymore in role-playing games, but it raged quite a bit at the beginning.
Oh, goodness. Okay, yeah.
Of whether or not the players should even know the rules at all.
Right.
Or if they should just live in the fiction of the world. I think it's a good thing that the players know the rules and that they have expectations about what they do narratively and what they describe, how that will affect the mechanics of the game. However, in these rulings and rules and versus rules, etc., we can end up getting ourselves into some sticky situations where players expect us to make a ruling going forward where we as GMs did not expect that. And this has happened to me. I think it's happened to almost every GM where you try and do a good job of being like, hey, this is a one-time thing. This is a one-time thing. Or this is an ongoing thing like you have. And you're very good at this. But sometimes in the pace of the game is, you're cranking through turns and maybe it's combat and it's really intense and you want to keep the pace of the game going. You just forget to say like, hey, it's not going to work like that every time. And then the player and the GM now have different understandings of how the world works and how the mechanics of the game will be adjudicated. And so I am thinking about this because I have no idea what my rule for luck was when you have advantage until we finally were like, okay, screw it. We're just going to do it this way. I think for a long time we were playing that if you spent luck on an advantage roll, you only got to re-roll one die and you took the new result. And now we're playing, you spend luck on an advantage roll, you get to re-roll both dice. It's just the new advantage roll. That's what you rolled. I don't know. I like our current situation, but like we got into situations where players were doing it differently at the table in our Dolmenwood game. And I realized, oh no, I have seriously screwed this up. And the statistics are quite different across those two methods. So how do we make sure that our rulings going forward, if you're not going to write it down, how do you make sure, like, I'm going to come back to your table. It's lucky we're doing this podcast because I'm going to come back to your table and you're going to...
Ungard's going to be doing crazy stuff.
Dude, I'm already thinking about how I could totally break your game, bro. And so...
Pretty easily.
So long story short, talk to me about how we ensure that players can feel confident in their decision-making in these circumstances. We've touched on it a little bit, but you can use spell shaping, you can use dual wielding, you can use my example of my screw up with advantage and luck. But talk to me about, especially if we're bringing in new players or you have an open table where players are cycling through and might not be hip to the jams, so to speak. What are we doing then?
Yes, indeed. That's a really great question because that last part in particular, if somebody new shows up to play with me as the GM, how are they going to get caught up on all this little quirks and idiosyncrasies?
No new players, Jody.
Never. That is also good. No. And that's the...
Do not welcome new people into the hobby.
Do not do that. Never. Kidding. So much kidding. If you've listened to us before, that is not our stance. There's so much to this of people who are very pro, I only play rules as written and I avoid rulings as much as possible, except when I feel like it's okay. Because then everybody knows what to expect. And there's a lot of value in that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to step back and come back. I'm going to do a little circuitous of my own. With any of these kind of weird debatey things that come up around RPGs in their entire history, predating anybody writing anything in ink, they're often, what I've noticed is there's always the go to the two extreme ends And those two camps sitting way down on one end of the beach are shouting at the people at the other end of the beach about that they're both doing it wrong, and ignoring the 75% of the total that are just hanging out in between, that are in the middle. The other argument to your, how is anybody going to know if you're making up all these rulings and these rulings are consistent? How are they going to know that? The other end is that, well, then there's no room for flexibility, and there is a genuine caution and fear of, I've had the experience of being like, hey, players, I want you to try things. I want you to be creative. I want you to be creative problem solvers. Okay, so we're in a hallway, right? Yeah. And the orcs are down behind the hall waiting to ambush us. We know they're down there, right? Okay, I'm going to ricochet my arrow around the corner. No. You said you wanted us to try stuff. Yeah, but that's ridiculous. Right, but I can't even try it?
Yeah.
Wub, wub, wub. And the game has just completely stopped being fun for every person at the table. So that's what the hell does that have to do with anything? That's my pushback on like, hey, you need to write this stuff down, or hey, this needs to be codified so people can grok these rulings and understand what are these long-term, and they can have reasonable expectations. Yeah. And at some point that also can become problematic, because then it is open to exploit. It is open to, good intentioned thought of like, I want to do this crazy thing. Okay, but that crazy thing is not in alignment with our general principles of play here. There are things that we have characters do an attempt in our Dolmenwood game that would not work at my table. I would have to go, no, that's not what we're doing. That's not the vibe of this game.
Right.
And the world would react to you very strangely if you did those things, because we don't have fungus people. Like
a sentient mushroom on someone's head that is not kind to newcomers.
Yeah, and that is the sort of thing that, if you showed up in my game world in town with that, they would not welcome you. You would be run out of town as some sort of weird mutant thing. So there's a spectrum, is my really poorly worded ramble here. Yeah. But I think what is valuable in this discussion, it is important, is this notion of expectation. Is how, just what you asked, how do your players know what to expect? As always, communication is key.
Sure.
Then what I've been leaning into lately, and has been a very conscious, mindful of my practice, is to talk about mechanics quickly during the game. Is to say, hey, so when the web conversation came up, was, hey, I want you as the player who is casting the spell. It's totally your call here. But whatever you decide is how web will operate going forward. Is it entirely magical, and anything that hits it is bound by its entangling nature, or it's a natural piece of webbing that should respond as a web would, other than it has likely a very high threshold for being sticky and breakable. There's a codified number that says that's what it takes to break it. Okay, cool. That's the one you want. Great. Then that's how the denizens of the world, this is a pretty common spell. If they're aware of spell casting, this is a known thing.
Right.
Cool. Off we go. We have now made that ruling. And yes, it's limited to my table. And I think that's all the better you're going to get. I don't know that it's worth pursuing that down the, well, what if I float that to somebody else or some other table, or, there's a real danger in that. And we watch this play out, in Discords and Facebooks and all the time. If somebody comes in and says, hey, I've been thinking about dual wielding, and they get flamed in the comments, or people go, sweet, try it. Because unfortunately, there's not much more to that conversation than, sweet, try it and let us know how it went.
Yeah. So, I was actually going to end this conversation by kind of, like, what I heard you say there at the end was that, like, our games are somewhat hermetic, right? Like, and this is kind of a thing we've come back to numerous times. And for me, what's interesting about our relationship as friends and GMs and we've co-GM'd, or I guess not co-GM, but we have GM'd in the same setting loosely, or the same game kind of, is that we've experienced a lot of different points of friction when it comes to making rulings and house rules. We have debated house rules that both of us were going to have to abide by. I think both of us made rulings that the other one was surprised by at our respective tables. And all of that is to say that inevitably, this isn't one of those things that you can get right all the time, even when there's only one GM, and even when there's only 3 or 4 consistent players. So that hermetic nature of our game, the fact that we only need these rulings to go so far as the game that we're running, I think is important and sounds an awful lot like a takeaway. Are you tired of crawling through crypts and hand-me-down chainmail? Sick of adventuring in mismatched boots, torn cloaks, and that weird-smelling tunic you looted off a skeleton 3 delves ago? You deserve better. And that is where the sponsor of this episode comes in, Urban Elffitters, TM. Your source of clothing, boots, and dungeon-ready drip. Urban Outfitters is the only outfitter blending function, flair, and just enough enchantment to keep you looking fresh and alive. Whether you're delving into cursed tombs, crashing a zombie's masquerade, or just vibing at the tavern, do it in style. Plus, every purchase you make right now comes with a complimentary pocket of holding a micro-sized pouch that fits 3 rations, 1 dagger, and your crippling fear of the dark. Shop their best sellers from the Roguish Intent Cloak to their elfin booty slides. Use the code Cara.
That's rare. That was rare right there. We usually are all good to get through them. Yeah. Elfin booty slides, man.
Well, I'm kind of riffing.
Sorry.
Use code.
I had nothing to do. Let it be noted when you edit this, I did not screw up that last one. God damn it. Go.
Use code CrawlFit. That is such a stupid. Why do I have that? Use code CrawlFit and check out 50% off your first order. Receive free shipping. Urban Outfitters, because surviving the dungeon is great, but surviving in style, that's the real loot. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with some core takeaways. Why don't you start us off?
Rules as written. Momentary rulings, consistent rulings, house rules. I think that's a worthy continuum, actually. I think there is some value as a GM in at least considering which of those categories are we in as we are working through situations at the table.
I like that. That's very interesting. And I think that kind of is a nice segue into my first takeaway, which is make sure that you're leading with intent. You described that you have some kind of intention in terms of how you're adjudicating a particular situation. In your case, trying to make sure that we're all kind of playing within the bounds of what makes sense in your setting. But leading with that intent and communicating that intent to players of why am I making this ruling? How am I thinking about it? And bringing them into the conversation is just I think it's a good practice in so many different places, but it's especially important here. What's your next one?
I'm going to piggyback yours before I go to my last one is, and if you play and you take turns as a player not behind the screen, lead your turn with intent. I would like to achieve the following as a player or as a GM. Freaking ask them, what are you trying to get done here? What do you want? All right. When in doubt, there are worse things than gating a ruling behind a die roll. This could be a 50-50 decider as described, rules as written in the Shadowdark rulebook, or it could be as I have done, you're going to need to make an additional intelligence test to get that spell to do something outside of its normal description. I know there's a lot of pushback for some GMs about adding die rolls. For me, this one's worthwhile.
And my last one, I'm just going to return to the point that I made kind of right before the old ad break there, which is that our games are hermetic in a lot of ways. And while it can be useful to listen to a couple of idiots on the internet wax poetic about their games, hopefully we bring some value to our listeners. It's also important to note that like our games are not... We cannot fully convey our games to other people, nor can we fully codify them in our own rules, documents, or whatever. And that is okay. That's a part of the organicness of this strange hobby. And the only people that we need to be concerned about are the people that we are playing with. And we also need to make sure that when we're talking about the game online, that we're properly contextualizing the goals and vibe that we as GMs are attempting to achieve when we're talking about our rulings and our house rules.
Well said, my friend. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, be sure to include the context and email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, we all know rulings are tough, but we all agree that Shadowdark rules.
Dungeon Master, that was nice. Dungeon Master Diaries, the production of Stingbat Radio Network, is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. And Dungeon Master Diaries, an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023. Great year. I mean, Shadowdark RPG came out. How could it be a bad year? It's great.